All right, so I'm going to give you a bit of an update about the department, but I'm going to start on a personal note first. This is my last alumni luncheon as department chair in Houston. I'll be stepping down on August 31st. And one of the great things about being department chair is meeting alumni, and I mean that very, very sincerely. I've probably met somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 alumni in the last 4 years. And the more I learn about what all of you do, the more I realize what an incredibly huge, bright light you shine back on our department, and that really, really, really helps the department. And I encourage you, as you do work in your profession, to keep reminding people where you got your degrees. That really, really helps us. I've got a quote here from one of my favorite musical acts, the person who writes songs for them, that says, "No dress rehearsal, this is our life." The last 4 years has been a wonderful part of my life, and a big part of that is meeting all of you. A big part of it has also been working with individuals in the Cockrell School of Engineering in my own department, and one of those individuals is here today, John Halton. This is John's last trip to Houston for one of these events. John officially retires this Friday. And so it's been amazing working with John for the last 4 years. He's introduced me to a lot of alumni, and I can't tell you of a harder working, more gracious person than John. So another quote from one of my favorite bands, the Tragically Hip, that I think fits John: "Armed with will and determination and grace too." So thank you to John for all you've done for our department and for the Cockrell School. All right, so a quick update. Where are we? How are we doing? Right? There's 141 programs in civil engineering in the United States that grant PhDs. And the heads of those programs vote on who they think are the top programs in the United States. And year after year after year, we're amongst the elite programs. So in the most recent U.S. News rankings that just came out a couple of weeks ago, we're rated number 4, tied with Stanford, with Berkeley, Georgia Tech, and Illinois ahead of us. When department heads vote, you vote on a 1 to 5 scale, 5 being the top scale, 1 being don't send your kids there. And so our ranking last year and this year was our score was a 4.6, which means a majority of our peers are saying we're a 5, we're in the top 10. So we're amongst the elite programs in the United States. In civil engineering, in environmental engineering, it's the same story. We're rated number 4. That's out of 93 programs in the United States that have PhDs with programs in environmental engineering. So again, we're a very elite program in environmental engineering. At the undergraduate level, we're rated number 4 in civil engineering. We're one of only 4 civil engineering programs in the United States that's rated in the top 4. Top 4 undergraduate and graduate. So it's Berkeley, Georgia Tech, Illinois, and us. So that's a pretty elite group that we're in, and we want to stay there. Environmental engineering undergraduate, we're rated number 7. This poll came out before we actually had an environmental engineering program. We now have an environmental engineering program, so hopefully we'll go up in the rankings next year. Our students, we currently have the most undergraduate students we've ever had in our department. We have 900 undergraduate students in our department, the largest we've ever been. 43% female, 26% underrepresented minorities. You can see here the application numbers from last year and this year. We're down a little bit in architectural engineering. We're down slightly in civil engineering, but not nearly as bad as a lot of our competitors around the country. High schools are not teaching kids to be excited about civil engineering these days, so a lot of high school kids don't have an interest in civil engineering. They all have an interest in robots these days. So that's down a little bit. We have a new environmental engineering program. We have 201 applicants for next year, and I think the number is about 80% of those are female. So that's going to really jack up the female percentages in the whole department. If you add these 3 together, we have a net increase in number of applicants relative to last year. You can also see that the students we're attracting, it's a big bump here in 1 year. We're getting a lot more valedictorians at their high schools applying, a lot more kids that have 750 plus SAT applying. And can everybody hear me okay? Good. And we have about 400 graduate students in the program. So we're a big program. Our ASCE concrete canoe team dominated the regionals for the second straight year, and they'll be going to nationals at the Colorado School of Mines in June. So they're pretty excited about it. They're particularly excited that their canoe this year seems to be a little more sleek than last year, and they're hopeful they can do a little bit better than they did in the nationals last year. We recently had our first doghouse challenge. I challenged the undergraduate students in our department to design a sustainable, resilient, structurally and in terms of moisture intrusion, thermally comfortable, healthy, aesthetically pleasing, and cost-effective doghouse. It's a huge success. We had 19 student teams involved. We had a huge crowd. We had prize money. We had judges from the profession. Those of you that are from Walter P. Moore, you might know Dirk Kessner. Dirk was one of the judges for the sustainable part of the doghouses. We gave prize money. We had these wonderful doghouses that our students designed. Yes?
Did the cat people complain?
I actually did get complaints from the cat people. They want like a cat skate competition next year or something like that. The exciting thing about this is we did so well that Northwestern University, Nebraska, North Carolina State, Carnegie Mellon, and Cornell, I believe, Cornell all want to start the same competition and then have a competition of best doghouses next year. So hopefully we can keep this thing rolling. It's a really fun project. In terms of faculty, our faculty bring in about $30 million per year in research. That's roughly 600,000 or so per faculty member, which is quite large for better than many of our peers. You can see the breakdown of assistant, associate, full professors, and the breakdown by areas. So right now, Environmental and Water Resources Engineering has 14 faculty. It's the largest program in our department. And then you can see the breakdown in other areas: transportation, structural, materials. IME stands for Infrastructure Materials Engineering. Some of you might just remember that as Materials Engineering, etc. So it's a large faculty. We had 3 new faculty members who joined our faculty in this past year. Lena Sella in the Water Resources Engineering area. She focuses on water distribution, drinking water distribution systems and their failures. Juan Murthy Adelso in Structural Engineering focuses on infrastructure health and rehabilitation of large infrastructure. And Zoltan Nagy in our Architectural Engineering program focuses on building energy, kind of smart buildings kinds of technologies. We had 4 faculty promotions this past year, including the speaker today, who will be officially an associate professor in 4 months. So Reze Ferron in Infrastructure Materials, Paola Passalacqua in Environmental and Water Resources, Naveed Saleh in Environmental and Water Resources, all promoted to associate professor, and Attila Novoselic, who's in our Building Energy and Environments group, promoted to full professor. So we were 4 for 4 this past year, which is great. Great candidates. We have a new BS in Environmental Engineering. We actually let some students in this spring who wanted to transfer out of civil to sort of prime the pump for the program, but the first sort of official class is this coming fall. As I said, a huge percentage of the students that have applied to this program are female, which is going to help with our gender diversity. We're already strong relative to our peers. It'll make us even stronger. Anyway, that program is officially starting, and we hope to get up to about 250 students at steady state by about 2021. So a pretty popular program in its first application period. We also have a new graduate program in Sustainable Systems Engineering that's really focused on infrastructure and infrastructure systems, infrastructure networks. It's not just environmental. It's construction engineering, transportation engineering, environmental engineering, etc. We just had our first cohort of applicants for this program for next year. We had almost 150, I think 140 applicants. The first time this program is offered, which is a huge number of applicants for new programs. So this is attracting a different kind of student, a student that's very systems oriented. And these days, if you want to get an NSF fellowship as a student, you have to be sort of systems oriented. So we're hoping that this will actually attract a lot of students to bring their own NSF fellowships to our department. ECJ renovations. If you haven't been to ECJ in some time, I encourage you to visit. When you walk in on the second floor, it looks completely different. If you go up to the third floor, we've completely gutted the third floor and rebuilt it into what I call the Engineering Nerve Center now, Undergraduate Engineering Nerve Center. We have a brand new architectural engineering design studio. It's 50% larger than the old studio. The money for that came from Tom Taylor, a gracious donation, and it's named the Datum Engineers Design Studio. It's really a classy facility. We have 4 new classrooms, a multi-purpose room, a tutorial room, and a bunch of new study space. That's where the old LRC where all the computers were. And the LRC where all the computers were is now on the 2nd floor of ECJ. We have a legacy campaign that's allowed us to fund a lot of undergraduates in research. So we funded 12 undergraduate scholars in research and 7 graduate students in research through our Legacy Fellows program. So that's worked quite well for us. And Friends of ALEC, which I know many of you have given to, and I very, very much appreciate that, helps us with a lot of things. It provides money for example, our ASCE team to go to the Nationals in Golden, Colorado in June. So that's discretionary money that's very, very helpful for those kinds of things. We have the most wonderful staff in the universe, and 2 of them are here today. Carol and Hortensia, please, raise your hands. But, we have 20 staff members for a huge department, and that's a 10% reduction in staff since I've become department chair. Sorry. But, we've had to consolidate. The state's not giving us as much money per student anymore, and so our staff works extra hard, including organizing these kinds of events. So I want to acknowledge them for that. We have an amazing future. We have great assistant professors in our department. We've been hiring assistant professors to bring new ideas, creative new ideas, new technologies. We have assistant professors now that use unmanned aerial vehicles and robots and all the things that excite high school students. And we've integrated them into our department. They're teaching new courses and introducing our students to more sensors and things like that. So unfortunately, your speaker for today is not shown in this photo because she didn't show up for it. But there should have been 3 more assistant professors in this photo.
I was, in fact.
So with that, as an introduction, I'll show you the person that didn't show up for the photo shoot. Professor Paola Passalacqua is your speaker today, and I'll just say a couple things about Paola. Paola is a real leader amongst our young faculty. I formed a strategic vision implementation committee, and I packed it with a lot of our young faculty members to try to advance our strategic vision. And I asked Paola to chair that committee this year, and she's done a great job, and they have all sorts of new initiatives reaching out across campus, collaborating with faculty across campus. Paola is an exceptional teacher. I think it was last year or 2 years ago, she received the top teaching award from the Association of Environmental Engineering and Science Professors for the entire United States. So, yeah. She was named 2 years ago, I think, also. It was a good year, 2 years ago, as the top assistant professor as a teacher in the entire Cockrell School of Engineering, all departments. She's won every teaching award in our department. Students love her, and she's doing great research. NSF career recipient, doing great research, great teacher, a big part of our future. And with that, Paola, it's yours.
All right, so it's a pleasure to be here and meet lots of you that I've never met before, and at the same time see former students, and it's really fun. It also means that I've been at UT for a little bit, since now my students are actually working, which is exciting. So, and also this gives me a chance to talk about flooding, which is one of the areas I work on, but it's not my classic talk, because I've been working a lot on coastal systems and coastal resilience, and so as of late I give a lot of talks about deltas, but we were coming to Houston, and so flooding seemed to be a very appropriate theme, and it's actually something that we are currently working on, so it's all work in progress. So first of all, I would like to, you guys hear me well? Yeah? Can't get rid of the accent, but we'll deal with it, all right? If I'm accelerating too much, that usually happens when I get excited, feel free to be like, slow down, please. So I wanted to acknowledge my current students, some of my current students, PhD and master students, who have done a lot of the work that I'll be showing here, as well as David Maidman, who lots of you will know because he's been in the department for a while, and he's really one of the main pillars behind this project. And there's a portion of it on which I'm responsible that I will discuss as well. And there's many others involved, and lots of great partners and funding agencies that are helping us do this work. So, I'm trained as a hydrologist, hydraulics, partly geomorphologist. So And I've been in graduate school in the US since 2003. And so in these last essentially 15 years, and even before, there's been a lot of changes in the way we think about hydrology and water resources. And namely is the fact that we have access to more stuff, right? So we have a lot of data, we have a lot of models, we are encountering new challenges because now these data sets are huge, and so we're running models which are very big, and we gotta think about how to make our models the most efficient. The thing is, sometimes the problems that we're dealing with, you could say they're not that new, right? And so when we think about flooding, actually it has been a problem for a long time. And we have these new data, we have these new models, and you would expect that we should be able to do something better. And it hasn't really happened yet, right? And so essentially what we're trying to solve, and what we've always been trying to solve, is this problem. That you have a prediction of weather, and that's a prediction, right? So it's made based on data. And you're trying to transform this into a risk map, into a flood inundation map where I have a prediction about weather, and I'm going to say, all right, this is the chance that my house is going to be flooded at some point during this night, right? And so the thing is, if you look at the classic way of doing this, so if we look at FEMA, this is a fantastic data set, but if we look at the FEMA National Flood Hazard Layer for Texas, all the white that you see is missing information. So actually the FEMA maps don't cover the whole US. There's in fact about 120 counties which are covered. The rest, there's no information at all, right? And we know that Texas, we do have lots of extremes, right? We have lots of droughts, we have periods where we don't have a lot of water, but we also tend to have pretty large events, right? And so essentially what this tells you is that if you're buying a house in any of these counties, if you live there, there's actually no there's no information for you to rely on to say, what's my chance of getting in the data here, right? And so what we're trying to do is to address this problem. And this is the way things were done before, right? So you have USGS gauging stations, you have a bunch of discrete localizations where positions where essentially you have instruments and you're monitoring what the water is doing during rainfall events, and then you're making a prediction as to what's going on. And I put here the Blanco River at Wimberley because you will all remember Memorial Day flood, right, a couple of years ago. So, and the damage and death and everything that happened in the Blanco River. And so what happened actually here is that there is one gauging station, just one. And so what happened is that the water was getting higher and higher and higher, and somebody that lived upstream, the upper part of the watershed, at some point called 911 and said, well, I've never seen this much water here. You guys got to do something about it, right? So this is 2015 with all the data, with all the models, with all the computational capabilities that we have. We have to rely on one person only and one gauging station to make predictions, and this is just not acceptable, right? And so what we are doing then is to go into here. We have the models. We can run models, and I will show you this, that essentially can give you forecast of prediction of how much water you're going to have in channels very fast anywhere in the US. This is continental hydrology. Forget about the stations that you're monitoring. You have models that now can just give you all these forecasts at any time. Can we translate this information then into flood inundation maps? They're actually also going to be cheaper than FEMA maps because we can just do them ourselves and essentially rely on terrain information that now we have to produce more accurate maps. So this is what we're working on, right? So we're going from a watershed hydrology based on, and it doesn't mean that we ignore this information. This is all embedded. But we're relying on this model and this data to make better prediction. And we should be in a position in which that can be done, okay? So this is what we're relying on. So this is not personally my work, but NOAA launched essentially this national water model. So this is a continental scale model that will give you essentially stream flow anywhere in the US, right? So it relies on the blue lines, essentially those flow lines that have been traced as a national data set all over the US. You can get a prediction, you can essentially run it. See if I can run it from here. No, I can't. I'll go back. So what you can do is you can ingest rainfall information. And now when it starts, you'll see it. And so you'll see part of the networks that are getting activated, right? So you see that? So you have all this stuff that is going on, and if you look at here, there's time going by, right? So this is actual how that rainfall that was happening at the time was translating into stream flow, all right? So you have this continuous capability. This is a past event, but of course you can do this with predictions, right? And so at any point here, and here of course the colors will indicate how many CFS you have. So you see the main arteries that are getting a lot of water. But what is interesting is the dynamics that you can see in this graph, right? Where you see all these portions of the network that are getting activated, and you can do this at any time, right? So you have a tremendous amount of information now with the national water model. This is all parallel computing, it's all fancy stuff, but the point is we have these forecasts available. And so this was launched in 2015, and this is what we're going to rely as one piece of what we're doing. Okay? It's pretty fun to look at it. I don't want you guys to do it for a long time. But so essentially what the model gives us is different types of forecasts. So you'll have short-range forecast, medium-range forecast, long-term forecast, and of course you can do ensemble analysis and so forth. But the point is that anywhere in the US, so you have 2.7 million stream regions, anywhere there, you can have information what stream flow is doing, all right? And so if you have a prediction, that map that we looked at before, rainfall prediction, well now we can see with the model what we would expect at any location in the US, all right? And that's a very powerful piece of information. And then as you get closer, of course, to the actual event, of course, the forecast gets updated and so forth, okay? And this is all accessible to anybody. So for example, then let's go back to 2015, a Memorial Day flood, one of the typical Texas events, and was particularly tragic, right? So we had slow-moving and strong weather system over Southwest. There was a lot of moisture. There was instability in the atmosphere. There was wind shear. And so we had this long-duration storm, right, with high rainfall rates. And I think all of you were in Texas when that happened, so we all remember how that event looked like. And so we had maximum near 13 inches, right, in Kendall and Blanco County, and there's a wide spread of 6, so the whole purple area. So this was actually not only a strong event, but also the amount of space that it covered was really substantial. So you have a lot of areas that are going to be in an emergency situation at the same time, right? And at the same time, we have lots of counties where there's no information, there is nothing going on, and so who's going to call 911, right? I mean, can we just do something better in which we can just activate an emergency responders in a more informed way based on the data and the models that we have? So these are just some images of what happened, right? And so this was the gauge height on the Blanco River. So at some point, this event essentially blows up, essentially. And here you see when the green, essentially when things were getting activated, and then the red was when the actual emergency response was efficient. And so more information, more data from the gauging station. So it was definitely an event that was challenging to forecast. I mean, it wasn't an easy event to deal with. It wasn't a small storm. It was a strong storm with long duration, with lots of damage, and it covered just a lot of space, and a lot of people were involved. And so this will give you, this is back to the same model, and this is actually what we could have done, right? So this is the national water model, which now it's being run for that event, with that rainfall event. And so what you are seeing is how much more information we would have had if this model were to be available. So now instead of having those discrete locations and only having measurements at those locations, we could have essentially, based on the forecast of rainfall, run the model and get some ideas of what stream flow we would expect, right? This is not, you would tell me, this is not inundation maps yet, right? Right now, we're still just at the level in which I'm using a model to forecast how much water I'm going to have in the channel. We still have to do the second step, in which now we take this water and we see how much water I get in the floodplain. And we're not there yet, but in the presentation. We're there in principle. All right, so back to here. You have stream flow. Are things clear for now? So we're running the model, all right? This is existing. NOAA did this for us. So this plus can be.
Have you tested whether the model, do you have actual data that you forecasted? Does your model, not historical, but future, like you forecasted this, and then did you find out if that happened or not?
Yeah, so we definitely, so that was the case. For example, so we have run the event for events we ran the model for events that happened before.
When California flooded in January, February, did this model predict that?
This has all been, well, I haven't looked at California. I haven't looked at California data myself, but we have definitely run the model for data that in the past and essentially compare what amount of water we would have seen. And this compares pretty well with actual observations.
So you've done historical, but you haven't yet used this to forecast?
No, this is constantly forecasting. Absolutely. So this that I was showing before, so constantly the model will make available for you short-term, medium-range, and long-range forecasts. And those, of course, you could say how far off you are. Well, of course, as you get closer to the event, it gets better, but at least especially because there's multiple forecasts being run and then you have ensemble results, so that gives you, you can compare all the different runs that you have, and if you start seeing peaks, right, then you know that something is actually happening. So it performs actually pretty well, and it gives them some chance of getting prepared. Yes, please.
There's two areas associated with these models and the work that have always kind of baffled me a little bit. Locally here, from Beaumont all the way down past Victoria, we've had a lot of regional subsidence, documented as much as 3 to 5 feet. And it's one of the reasons the legislature stopped using well water and caused surface water. And the other is the effect of tides on the hydraulic flow. How do you, in real time, take care of that? I can see the model built as of a particular time, but then as subsidence continues over time and as tides fluctuate every 12 hours, that seems like those are parameters that are important.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I will say that as you get close to the coast, things get complicated for sure, and we see this. I'll show you this later also in these results. But the thing is, starting with the terrain gets more complicated because it gets flatter. And so lots of these predictions kind of rely on this convergence and network and these gradients in the terrain. Once you get down here and you get closer to the coast, forget about it, right? And so from a terrain perspective, it gets much more complicated starting with. And I completely understand your point, and I'm completely agreed. I work on coastal systems and coastal resilience for both Texas coast and Louisiana. So I'm involved with the restoration of the coast of Louisiana. So I completely understand that point, and it's absolutely true. The thing is, this part right here, you can think of it as stuff is coming in as rainfall, I'm going to propagate it. It does not account for what will be happening offshore and how does that information propagate to the coast. And in fact, we've been having discussions, there's colleagues of course at UT that have worked on that portion, and so you could actually start merging the models and see what's actually my boundary condition and what is this doing. And we know, and all of you will remember, and my students will remember, right? We get closer to the coast. It's all a subcritical environment, so what actually is driving that water level is exactly what's happening at the bay. So I can have all the condition from upstream that I want, but it's that boundary condition that is going to control water level. That piece is not in place, but it definitely makes a lot of sense. And if things get to the coast, flatter, boundary condition varying, things are messy, but we'll get there. Any other question at this point? Okay, so let's move forward. You do a lot. So, okay. All right, so now I wanted to go back here and say, all right, so let's go back to the inundation map. As I said, now we have a better idea of what stream flow I might expect, provided this rainfall pattern that I'm expecting to see. How does that get translated into actual inundation maps? All right, so now we need to get this condition in the channel and say, how far is the water going to go? When am I going to get inundated? When is your house going to get flooded, right? And so we need to do something better than here and actually get at least the state of Texas covered and use this as an example that this can be done continental scale. And so what we're using is a method that you could argue is overall fairly simple. So you have terrain data, right? And based on terrain data, and you guys probably do it on a regular basis, I mean, you know where the water is going to go. Simply, you follow steepest descent, right? Wherever is steeper, I mean, if I'm sitting right here, clearly I'm going to send my water down there because it's lower than where I am, right? And so if I have terrain information, then what I can do is to follow these slopes, know where I'm sending my water, and then knowing where I live, so that's my address points, and all our address points are 911 response addresses, right? And so if I'm there, I know, all right, so how higher am I with respect to the point where I'm sending water? 10 feet, whatever that is, whatever the value is. Well then, at that point, when the water is gonna reach me, of course I'm gonna be flooded, right? And so we call this hand the height above nearest drainage, meaning what's your height where you live with respect to the channel where you're sending your water. And essentially that water level is gonna get higher and higher and higher, and when it reaches your location, you're flooded, right? Simple enough. And so, of course, then flooding will occur when your water depth is gonna be greater than the hand value, all right? So this means that we need a data set that tells us where the channels are, right? So now historically, and I will go back to this point, but there's NHD Plus, which is a national data set that will just give you catchments and flow lines for the whole US. So we know where the channels are located. There are issues with it, and I will show you what those are. But for now, let's just rely on that. All right, there's a network. And then I have a terrain information, and I have digital elevation model. We have them over the whole world. The resolution varies, but there's definitely 30-meter resolution terrain data available everywhere you are in the world. And so you can rely on this terrain information. You know where the channels are, then you can compute this height above the nearest drainage because I have terrain information. I know where the channel is, and so I'm just computing my slopes. I'm seeing where I'm going, I'm getting the height, and I get my hand, right? And then you can translate this into an inundation map. For example, say height above drainage less than 15 feet, you're flooded. All right? Does this make sense? This piece? Yes? This way we created a map like this. This is hand everywhere in the US. All right? These are all meters. And so everywhere in the US, then you have an idea of at what height you would get inundated. Based on these analyses, you have flow lines everywhere in the US. You have terrain information everywhere in the US. Where do I send my water? There. At what height am I going to get flooded? This one. Map this over the US. Now you got a map that tells you everywhere what's going to be the height at which you're going to be in trouble. All right? Does it make sense? So now we have essentially two pieces, because now we have a model, continental scale, that tells me how much water I'm going to expect in the stream based on that prediction of rainfall. And now I have a map that tells me everywhere I am, at what height I'm going to be in trouble. Put the two things together, now you get a flood risk map, right? Now you know, if you expect this amount of water, I'm going to expect to get flooded here. I'm going to know if my house is going to get flooded for that event, and I'm going to know roughly when that's going to happen. Address points everywhere in Texas, and this wasn't directly my work, as David Arthur, one of our research scientists. This was a tremendous amount of work because lots of counties just don't talk to each other. So it was a lot of work to just collect all of this in one data set. But essentially, these are all the points that I use for dispatching emergency response vehicle. So if right now we call 911, there's an address point essentially on the roof of this building, and they would send, we're georeferenced, and they would send help to our location. They know where we are, right? So if we have then a map of where all these locations are, now you have a model that gives you stream flow for that prediction of rainfall. You have a map that tells you at what height you're going to be inundated, and I have all these address points of your homes, my home, that tell me where I am with respect to that map. Then what I can do is to color those points, right, those address points, and say, this is where I'm at risk, right? And so, of course, red are going to be points that are lower, and that's where you're going to be inundated more often, right? And of course, as we see, as we get close to the coast, as you would expect, things get flooded, things get lower. I get much lower in terms of where I'm going, at what height I'm going to be flooded. Okay? So this is possible. This is done. Now, what I'm going to show you, so these are all essentially the steps that we have. So you forecast discharge with the National Water Model. We have that. We convert the discharge to depth using a rating curve that tells you how much water you're going to have in the channel based on the discharge. You convert that depth to inundation based on this hand map that we developed, and so that's done. And then I'm going to measure impact by looking at how many address points I'm going to be impacted by that event, right? And the thing is, the former chief of Austin firefighters is actually part of our research team. So he's helping us make these maps something that can actually be used, right? Because we can do all the fancy science that we want, but if then firefighters are going to look at these maps and say these are worthless, we completely failed our mission, right? So they're actually involved in the conversation. he's been really helpful, and they're actually helping us understand what's the format that is going to be used and what's the format that is going to be the most successful to give this map to the emergency responders and make sure that when we have another Memorial Day flood, the firefighters are ready, we have the model prediction, we have the inundation map, and we can act much faster than waiting for a disaster to happen. Okay? Now, I wanted to go back to here because, as I said, the inundation maps need to know where the channels are, right? So I need to know that I'm sending my water there in order for me to make a measurement of how high I am with respect to the channel, right? And so this data set, I said it exists, it's everywhere in the US, great. Well, the point is that resolution matters. Terrain resolution matters and things are changing, right? So these are the 80s. Every pixel was 90-meter resolution. When these data sets came out, people were super excited. We got terrain information everywhere. That's a 90-meter pixel. It means you have one elevation point, right? And the pixel is 90 by 90. It was great. That's all we had, right? Got to the 90s, 30 meters. Got to the 2000, the national elevation data set. Get to now, this is LiDAR, all right? So now the information is actually a 1 meter resolution. It's actually sub-meter. All right, and we're doing this on other planets as well. There's 25 centimeters data for Mars. Very interesting. So it's actually really cool. So, and this is what essentially I did my PhD on. So when I was doing my PhD, these LiDAR data sets came out, and they were so cool. They were so exciting. Nobody knew what to do with them because now you got a lot of data, right? So great. And now from here, I go here. All right, now what do I do with it? And so what the community started doing is to stare at this data. And so we said, well, we need to actually use this data, and then we realized that it was pretty hard, right? And so this is the current coverage in the US of LiDAR data. So when you see this kind of creamy white color, that's where it doesn't mean that we don't have data, it just means that the data is not publicly accessible. So in the US it's great because there's lots of countries that have LiDAR that is all proprietary, but we actually do fairly well, and I'll show you another map for Texas. You'll see that actually it's going to get covered much more. North Carolina was the first state to be completely covered pretty quickly. So now these data sets, usually they're acquired from a plane or an helicopter. You're essentially sending a pulse of light, and you're measuring the distance, right, by essentially measuring the return time. And so it's an amazing technology, right? And all these data sets, normally they just get released for free. So we do have access to very good terrain data. And here you see Texas current plans. So when you see the light green, this is FEMA pending flight being planned. The yellow, the orange is FEMA planned. And then you see other data sets, Texas Water Development Board for orange. And the darker green shows you what data we currently have, all right? So there will be, as you see, FEMA is going to acquire 50,000 square miles in the winter of 2016, 2017. So the data are coming up, they're being acquired, they're being released, so we have access to this information. Now, the thing is, what happens then when you take those flow lines, the one that we're currently used, that we have, the NHD Plus, and you put it on LiDAR, and I chose a Houston watershed to bring you home. So this is Houston, right? And so this is how the watershed looks like. So this is all LiDAR data. You see there's a little bit of noise roughness, right? You see that there's a lot of detailed information happening here. And I'm going to focus on that square that you saw earlier up here, just to show you an example. And this is where the NHD Plus lies on. So it's off track, all right? And it's not unexpected because these data sets were derived on lower resolution data. So you had those pixels, you had the information that you had, and you trace where the channels were. The problem is you put it on LiDAR, which is a much better representation of what actually things are, and now we realize that the path is off. This is an issue, right? Because we're using this channel to tell me at what height I'm going to be flooded. But if the channel is off path, my inundation map is going to be affected by it, and this is bad, right? Because we're making prediction at address points based on information which is inaccurate, right? So can we do something better? The answer is yes. So the thing is, this data, as I mentioned, the LiDAR data, this is not just a finer version of what we had before. It requires new methods. You can't just go and say, do the old stuff on the new data. It's not going to work because the challenges are different, right? And so it has been great for our community. It tells us how things move. People do before and after flooding, for example, for understanding how much material is moved. You can do post-fire. You can do great flood inundation mapping. But the thing is, you need the right tools for doing that. And the reason why I say it is, for example, now you see bridges. So if you're doing a classic analysis of channels, and as we said, I'm following the steepest descent, right? So I'm looking at points that are lower than I am along the steepest path. Does it make sense? And I encounter a bridge, what happens? Where is the water going to go? What is the bridge actually doing?
For a while, it acts as Venturi.
Yeah? Well, but if you have an elevation point that is taken on top of the bridge, how is that going to act with respect to you trying to move downstream? Now you have a point that is on top of the bridge. What did you guys say? Yeah, you can't go anywhere, right? It's going to act as a barrier. Does it make sense? I agree with you as to what would happen underneath. But the thing is that my elevation points are taken from above. If I have a point that is up there and I'm following my steeper descent and I encounter the bridge, I'm totally stuck.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
That's not going to work.
Yeah.
Okay? So you need new ways of doing this because the classic extraction methods are going to get stuck. Okay? And so this is what we did. This was actually my PhD thesis. So it was solving this problem of rethinking about how to extract channels now that we have LiDAR data. All right? And so I worked many years on this since 2007. And this is an open source tool. We started with MATLAB. We brought it into Python. It's completely accessible and it's free to everyone. So we have government agencies using, universities using it. And the thing is, it has three main points, and I'm going to go through them quickly just for you to see what the method is about. Essentially, the first thing that we do is filtering. What I mean with filtering is that because of all this detailed information that you have, now I follow the channel, and what I start seeing is bumps, for example, on the terrain. I start seeing vegetation, and that stuff needs to be removed. It's kind of noisy, right? What I want to focus on is the channels and the banks. That's all I want. So I need to clean this up a little bit. Then I need to know what the channels are, and sure enough, channels are convergent features. So I can use curvature, and you can think of it as a metric for understanding where the water is actually going to converge to. And then I need something that allows me to go through those bridges that act as barriers, all right? And so that's going to be another mathematical tool that comes from image processing. It has been developed before, and we're just using it in a different context. Math, we were talking about that calculus, didn't we? Where are we? So you don't have to focus too much on this, but this is a diffusion equation. So all that is doing is to say I'm going to move material. So if you run, it's like heat diffusion. If I run a diffusion equation, if I run a filter on this room, at the end of the day, it's all going to go to some average elevation, just smoothing out things, right? And so what we said is like, all right, so let's imagine that this is my channel bank. You know, it's not, but it's easier to work with stuff that is fake, so we can see things. I add noise on top of it, and let's say I just diffuse everybody equally. All right? So then what happens is that I get rid of the noise. Great, right? I just added some stuff on it. I get rid of the noise, but the truth is that I also get rid of the actual information. My bank now, this guy right here, essentially is becoming like a little curve, right? It's smoothing and it's losing localization. So if that's your channel and those are your banks, that's bad because now the width of the channel is changed, for example. So we borrowed this nonlinear filter from the image processing community, and this filter essentially uses gradients. So it says if there's something sharp and steep, don't do anything to it, just keep it. But if it's something small, just get rid of it. So essentially it has preferential smoothing, and you can create a data set which is nice and clean. Then we use this curvature map. You can't see much here, but essentially what we're doing is statistics, which you will remember as one of your favorite courses, I hope. So you're measuring curvature, so you're looking at the second derivative of the terrain. And what we're doing is a PDF, and essentially we use deviations from a Gaussian model to know where the channels are. So we're saying it's not only a curvature greater than 0, I want stuff that is really convergent. And so that allows me to get a map of where the channels are. The third thing is what avoids that problem of the bridge that I described. It's the fact that if I have 2 points, if I'm going from here to the bottom of the room, I can go there in many ways. But if I'm a channel, I have a preferential path in my mind. I want a very convergent path. I want stuff where the water is accumulating. And so what if I make that a cost function? And I'm going to penalize anybody who goes through another path. And I just minimize the cost along which those attributes are preserved. The advantage is that if we go back to that bridge problem and the dam, if I know I'm going from here to there and I encounter you as a barrier, who cares? Because this is my actual direction of minimization of the cost. So it actually goes through. So our channels will cut through the bridge, no problem, because the general direction in which the coast is minimized is that one. So I'm not going to take a path around. So we have very good ways of analyzing channels. So let's go back where we were, right? And so let's go back right here. This is then HD+. This is how well we do, all right? And so this yellow line here, and now you see, we're not perfect, all right? It's no miracle tool, but we do actually much better. So essentially right now, we're in the process of going to the next step with this project, and now using this information for remapping where inundation is going to happen, now relying on LiDAR. And as more LiDAR gets available, we'll just ingest those data into this project. And so once you have that, and here I'm going to Austin because this data have been actually validated, then you can go back to those address points that I was showing you and color things based on hand. And the interesting thing is that for cities like Austin, for example, Houston and so forth, we actually have hydraulic models that tell us that, that you spend time running the model, calibrating the model, making a prediction of where the water is going to be. And so we're validating these results, which are, a simpler approach, if you like, with modeling that has been done, accounting for LiDAR data, with models that have been calibrated, and we are seeing that the patterns are actually very similar, that the predictions that we are making are actually pretty good compared to models that you have to spend money and time to run. So this approach doesn't necessarily substitute accurate modeling. What it's doing is to rely on the information that we have, validating it with the model, but you can run it continuously, right? You don't have to calibrate the model every time. You're just going to keep on producing this information. And so when the rainfall event happens, you have direct access to this. And the idea is that these are actually becoming maps. And that's where our colleague, Harry Evans, former chief of Austin Firefighters, comes into the picture because he's helping us make these maps something that the 911 responders have and can read and can use during emergency response. Okay? And so this is where we are. So there's 4 levels essentially of this project. This has essentially been done in terms of the approximate. With approximate, I mean with data that is coarser, right? So that's been done with Texas completely covered as a prototype. So this can be done at continental scale. And level 3 and 4 are higher accuracy. These relies on LiDAR, and so we're starting inputting this GeoNet, this tool that we developed, into the project such that we can develop more accurate information, at least for the locations that have LiDAR, and more LiDAR will become available. So having said that, I'm going to leave you with this slide, which has all the people that are involved, that are collaborating, that are funding this work, and so forth. And I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
We talked about 2015 flooding, but last year down south we had the Brazos River that had major flooding, and actually at 59 there, it took a couple of months before it actually got back in the banks. And part of my suspicion might be because the Brazos River actually has lots of dams along the river. How do you handle the fact that flow through a dam can change depending on I'm operating the dam, I need to open up a spillway wider, and that human interference with your model, how do you handle that?
Yeah, very fair point. And in fact, that's not embedded in there right now. The thing is that if we do it, like for example, last week there were a couple of locations close to Austin that last 2 weeks essentially they were going to have flooding. And so in those cases, if we have access to the information, if we have access to the operation of the dam and how much water is going to be released, then we can run the model and make a better prediction. But as of now, at this scale, of course, the reservoirs are not embedded. So I think that's where the local modeling comes into the picture, and that's where we don't create a tool to say this is it and we're done. There's always going to be room for improvement. If that information is publicly available, it can be embedded, no problem, and it can be re-updated as you're running it. But I think as of now, you have a starting point which is better than what we had before. And then, as that information comes in available, or as more modeling results come in, then we can ingest that information. But as of now, the reservoirs are not included. Yes. Yeah. Yes, please.
Yeah. How many of these programs take into account land development as it advances away from like the Houston area, upstream, and the land absorption, the escalated runoff, detention, retention, ponds. I think Harris County, which we're in, is a pretty bad example of that, including surrounding counties. All of those factors are developing so fast. Are you all tracking them, or have a way to track them in these programs?
The model can definitely be updated in terms that as long as we have access to that information can be embedded.
Yeah, because really it looks like all you're getting is runoff.
Yeah, no, there's a soil
Runoff.
component. I mean, of course, it's parameterized, so you could argue that if you have a nice local calibrated model, it's probably going to be more accurate than this. But that soil component is embedded in.
See, I don't see Harris up there under county partners, which typical. I guess Houston emergency management is, but the city of Houston just they're fighting. They have limited funds to address what's happening here with us toward the bottom of the runoff, and we've got old dams out here in West Houston, Barker and Attucks. They're worried about dam failure now.
Right. And it's part of what we were discussing before. Even without the dam, actually, as we get to Houston and lower areas, even just from a terrain perspective, even without development, the problem is more complicated. Especially because we're relying on terrain information, and as it gets flatter, the terrain is just less and less informative. Now, the thing is, there's other tools that we have developed, for example, for analyzing imagery. So, for example, satellite imagery, whatever resolution we have available. And so I think what's going to happen is that as we move closer to the coast, where it's flatter, where there's lots of urban development, what we might do is to actually rely on imagery rather than rely on terrain information. But in the model, as long as the information is made available, the information is being ingested. So there's no reluctance in embedding as much. I think that the challenge has been that, as you're saying, there's all these pieces of information that are with different agencies, where with different people handling them, and it's just, even just bringing all the information into one spot and embedding it into one model and one approach is already a step forward.
The flood control district has what I think, quite excellent early warning system that's available to anyone on the internet. All of the bayous have real-time monitoring. These are not models, these are actual flow and cross-sections as the bayous build up. And if you look at stations upstream of where you live, you have a real good indication of what's coming to you in a matter of 30 minutes, an hour and a half. So it's a resource that I don't think enough people are aware of in the Houston area.
That's
Well,
helpful.
I don't disagree with that. Problem is, how are we addressing it financially and doing something about it?
Well, we now have a flood czar.
Well, so we've been having discussions, for example, with TxDOT a lot, and we're going to test something now in the Onion Creek watershed in the Austin area. We're going to start placing water level and velocity sensors on bridges. And so that information will be embedded. So we're actually testing this instrumentation, which is really nice, and it gives very accurate and detailed information of how high the water is and what the velocity is. And David Maidman in particular has been presenting these a lot at TxDOT. So the hope is actually that we start instrumenting all the bridges that we have with sensors that can tell us how high the water is. Please.
How good or how bad are the FEMA maps that we rely on, at least in the city, with all the problems that we have with the flood?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, we still have to do a nice validation, but you can tell already, for example, that when the maps are traced with LiDAR, is already much better than with coarser resolution. So I think where the maps are available, and if LiDAR was available, the extent, the 100-year flood, 500-year flood is not bad. The thing is, often that LiDAR wasn't available, so that information is not accurate. And the problem is that, for the most part, I think the emergency responders will tell you inaccurate is fine, is nothing that we can't deal with, right? So we as researchers and engineers tend to be very, very accurate. So for us, it's like, oh, I'm going to take you this accuracy down. And the emergency responders that are with us will be like, forget it. We need a map to work with. And so I think the problem we're trying to address now is you have all these counties without any information. Let's get something. And we'll get something better as we develop better tools and better models. But the thing is, for now, let's just get a starting point in all those counties that don't have anything.
And a follow-up, is that FEMA willing to,
They're participating. I mean, I think particularly David has been really good, talking to everyone and bringing everybody in the same room. It's flooding. There's a lot of interest and there's a lot of politics and there's a lot of stuff involved. But I think all the partners have been really good at just seeing that this is an opportunity for all of us to just do something together, and for us as researchers to do something that's helpful. Because ultimately, if it can't be used, I can publish all the papers that I want, but Rachel will be happy. But we're not all going to be happy if we don't get something done. Something there, yeah.
Okay, what you described this model is basically analyzing if I dump a bucket of water into this natural waterway, how the water is going to go in most part. But in the big city like Houston, there are a lot of man-made, drainage system, either underground, detention pond, a bunch of other stuff similar to the question about development, redevelopment, what we need to do to divert the water from point A to B. How's that system, man-made side, going to affecting the precision of your model?
I mean, it definitely does, and I think ultimately what I think we want to achieve is a hierarchy information. You have a pipe network, you have a channel network, you have all these, you have a transportation network, right? I mean, I think what we need to do, what we need to go, is to have all these networks talk to each other. So it's not only the natural system, but it's embedding the information that is coming from the pipe network, and it's embedding the information of where the roads are and what's going on with those ditches. I don't think this integration is not at the level that I'm describing right now as to where we want to be. But as more and more information becomes available, there's no reason why that cannot be included, and so you can have at least inlet outlets being added and account for those inflows as they're coming in. Urban environments are challenging. There's nothing to say. I mean, I think we would be doing super well in a completely natural environment, but of course we live in the environment that would modify it. And I think, we can, as long as that information is available, I think what we need to achieve is a model in which all these layers talk to each other. Fair point. Yes?
I live off Brays Bayou, and I've used the county maps, and they do provide them real time. But one thing that I've noticed, and it's particularly bad along Braeswood, is because the inlets that normally drain into the bayou, when the bayou reaches a certain level, they become like artesian wells to shoot water out. So the top of the bank isn't really accurate. If you look at 288, a lot of people may not realize it floods miles from Braeswood because the inlets, the backflow, and does your model? I know it may be where you have more terrain like in Austin or San Antonio, that may not be as much of a problem, but when it's flat like it is in Houston, do you take into account, or is that because that people don't care where it came from when it's coming into their house?
Absolutely. But that's where
upset.
I agree, and I think that's where all these comments are going, right? I mean, you get flatter, the terrain is less informative, all sorts of human modification, and can you take that into account? And I think part of it is going to be to rely on other tools as well. I mean, there is imagery, right? At any time in flooding, during a flood, we have imagery being taken, aerial photographs, whatever that is. We can analyze those and see and compare, for example, what the model extent is with respect to what you actually observe. And if there's a mismatch, then there's a source of data that we're not using. And I think we're going to get there. And it's certainly true that I've been analyzing terrain data for all my career, and the thing is, the flatter it gets, the harder it gets. In a way, that's where the higher is the resolution, the finer is the information, the better it's going to be. Because in an area like this, if you have a 30-meter pixel, 90-meter pixel, it's done, right? Because that's completely fat at that scale. But when you look at the actual detail, I think we can do something with it. But that's very fair. Any other question? So you're telling me 5 minutes. Anything else? Thank you.
can all see why we're so proud of Paola and what she adds to our department as a teacher. I wanted to mention one more thing before you leave, and that is we have 4 of these events. We have one in Dallas, one in San Antonio, one in Austin, one in Houston. We have a different speaker at each event. And so in about a month or so, you can go online if you want to, go to our departmental website, and you can look at the other speakers. So we have Mike Engelhardt speaking in San Antonio this year on steel design, Kevin Folliard speaking in Dallas on advances in concrete materials, and Fernando Leite spoke in Austin on building information modeling, advances in building information modeling. So, and you can also see previous years if you go to that same site.
Is the San Antonio event going to be at the Riverwalk?
No. So thank you all for coming, and go do great things and keep mentioning our department.